I have never told anyone this, but the winter I turned 14, my father put a bucket in my bedroom because the roof leaked. And when I asked if the roof could be fixed, he told me the bucket was fine and that I was being difficult again. That word. Difficult. I want you to understand how much work that word did in my family because everything else grows out of it. I'm Dwayne. I'm 31 now. When I was 9 and my sister Ophelia was 7, my parents, Raymond and Diana, bought a 4-bedroom house on a street where nobody was quite as comfortable as they wanted people to believe. 4 bedrooms. Master, 2 normal rooms, and 1 small one. And an attic with a plywood floor, a pull-down ladder, and a window that didn't close all the way. Guess where I slept? Here's the part people always want explained, so let me explain it up front, because it's not a mystery. It's just ugly. My mother had me at 19. My father was 22 and had plans that did not include being 22 with a baby. Ophelia came 2 years later, after they were married, after they'd decided, after it was a choice instead of an accident. Nobody ever said that to me in those words. They didn't have to. It was in how my father talked about the year I was born. Always as the year everything got hard, always with this little pause. It was in how Ophelia's baby photos filled 3 albums and mine filled half of one. And it was in the story they told about me, which they'd been telling since before I could contradict it. Dwayne is difficult. Dwayne is a handful. Dwayne came out fighting. I didn't come out fighting. I came out inconvenient. And they needed a reason for how they felt about that, and a difficult child is a reason. It lets you off the hook. You're not a father who resents his son. You're a father with a difficult son. And everyone at the barbecue nods sympathetically and hands you another beer. So, the house. When we moved in, Ophelia got a normal bedroom and I got a normal bedroom, and there was one spare. For about a year, everything was ordinary. Then Ophelia turned 8 and started asking for the spare room because it had better light. And my parents said no, and she cried for 2 weeks, and my parents said yes. Fine, whatever. She had 2 rooms and I had 1, and that was the tax on being me. I understood it. I was 10. The attic came when I was 12. My grandmother, my mother's mother, moved in for a while. Her health was going. She needed a room on the ground floor, which meant somebody had to move, and it was never in question who. My father took me up the ladder and showed me the attic like he was showing me a car he'd bought me. He'd put down a rug. There was an outlet. He said this was the kind of thing men do for family, and that I was old enough to be a man about it. And then he said the thing that I still think about at least once a week, 18 years later, which is that he knew I'd complain because I always complain. But he hoped I'd surprise him. He said that before I'd said a single word. I didn't complain. I want that on record. I carried my mattress up that ladder myself in 2 pieces because it wouldn't fit through the hatch hole. I lived up there for 6 years. My grandmother passed when I was 14, and her room went to my mother as a sewing room, which she used maybe 9 times, and I stayed in the attic. Nobody discussed it. Ophelia turned 12, and for her birthday she got the master bedroom, because Raymond and Diana had decided it made more sense for them to take the smaller room and give their daughter the big one with the bathroom attached, since she was a growing girl and needed her privacy. I heard my mother explain this to a neighbor at the mailbox. She used the phrase, "the boy prefers the attic." Prefers. She said, "I prefer it because I like my space, because I'm difficult, because I don't want to be around people." I was standing right there. I was 14. And I didn't say anything because I'd learned by then that arguing was itself the proof. Every time I objected to anything, that was the difficultness showing. It was a closed loop. There was no version of me that could get out of it because calm meant I was fine with it and upset meant I was being difficult, and either way, nothing changed. The roof leaked over the corner where my dresser was. Not a drip. A trickle when it rained hard, down the inside of the boards, pooling. I moved the dresser, and then it leaked over where my head was, so I moved the mattress. And I told my father, and he brought up a bucket from the garage, one of those orange ones, and he set it down and looked at it like he'd performed surgery. Every fall he'd say he was going to get someone up there before winter. Every spring the bucket was still there. In February, I'd sometimes wake up and there'd be a thin film of ice across the water in it. That bucket is still in my head. Bright orange. A crack in the rim from where I dropped it going down the ladder to empty it in the yard. And the whole time, the story they told outside the house was that they were long-suffering parents doing their best with a difficult son. when I stopped going to the family Christmas gathering at 17 because I couldn't sit through another round of Raymond doing his routine about how Ophelia's the easy one. That became evidence. Difficult Dwayne wouldn't even come to Christmas. My aunt still brings it up. I left at 18. No blow-up, no door slam, nothing dramatic. I had a night stocking job and I moved into a room in a house with 4 other guys and a landlord who didn't ask questions. I told my mother I was going and she asked if I'd thought about how this would look. Not how it would feel. How it would look. Now here is where I tell you, the thing that's going to make some of you uncomfortable. And I'm going to say it plainly because I've had 13 years to get comfortable with it myself. I never got over it. I know what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to grieve the parents you didn't have, do the work, come out the other side lighter. I read the posts. I know the language. And I want to tell you that I tried and it didn't take. Because every single thing I've built since I was 18, I built with them in the back of my mind. Not as motivation in the inspirational sense. As an audience. I worked doubles for years and put every dollar somewhere it would grow. And when I was 26, I bought my first property, a duplex that needed everything. And I did most of the work with my own hands because I'd learned to fix things young, in an attic, out of necessity. I bought a second one at 28, a third at 30. Nothing glamorous. Ugly little buildings in ugly little neighborhoods that nobody else wanted, bought cheap, fixed slow. And every time I signed something, I thought about the bucket. That's not healthy. I'm aware. But I'd like anyone who wants to lecture me about it to first go spend 1 January in a room where your breath is visible and the man downstairs, warm, has told the neighbors you prefer it. I kept tabs. Not obsessively, but my cousin Neville and I stayed in touch. And Neville is the kind of person who cannot hold information, it just runs straight through him. So if I called him twice a year and asked how everyone was, I'd get the full accounting. Which is how I knew, over the last few years, that things at Raymond and Diana's had been getting thin. My father had been out of steady work for a stretch and then took something that paid less. They'd taken money out of the house twice. Ophelia moved back in at 27, after her marriage fell apart with her 2 kids, and my parents put her in the master bedroom. Of course they did. And Neville, who does not understand what he is handing me when he hands it to me, mentioned around Easter that Diana had been asking whether Dwayne had done well for himself. That she'd heard I owned property. That she'd said, "And I'm giving you this the way Neville gave it to me. That family should be able to count on family." I have been waiting for that sentence since I was 12 years old. I didn't call them. I didn't do anything. I went and looked at what was public and available about their situation, the way anyone can, and I sat with what I found. And I understood that the thing I'd been circling for over a decade was going to arrive on its own. It wasn't going to require me to do anything except be ready. So I got ready. 3 weeks ago, on a Thursday evening, my mother called. First time in almost 2 years. She didn't ask how I was for more than about 11 seconds. She said there'd been some trouble with the house, that it was complicated, that she wasn't going to get into it on the phone, and that she and my father and Ophelia and the kids were going to need somewhere to be for a little while. She said the word temporary 4 times. I counted, because I was already counting. And then she said that she'd always known I'd be the one to step up. That underneath everything, I was a good boy. That she and Raymond had always said that about me. In private? In private, where nobody could hear it. I told her I'd think about it. I told her to have Raymond call me on Sunday. And then I hung up and I went down to my garage, and I found the orange bucket because I took it with me when I left at 18, and I have moved it 4 times. And my girlfriend Naomi has asked me twice why I keep a cracked bucket on a shelf. And both times, I told her it was for the car. It isn't for the car. I own 3 properties now. One of them has an attic. I know exactly what I'm going to do, and Sunday's coming, and I'm not going to pretend to any of you that I feel bad about it. Update 1. A lot of you told me not to do it. A lot of you told me to do it and film it. One person told me I was going to regret it in 10 years, and that the attic wasn't the point, the bucket was. And I've read that comment about 6 times, and I still don't know if it's wisdom or nonsense. Anyway, Sunday came. Raymond called at 4 in the afternoon. My father does not make small talk with me, never has. So it was maybe 40 seconds before he got to it. And even then he came in sideways, which is his whole method. He wanted to know if Diana had explained the situation. I said she'd explained that there was a situation. He didn't like that. There was a long pause where I could hear television. And then he told me. He didn't tell me all of it, I found that out later, but he told me enough. They lost the house. Not in one dramatic stroke. It had been going for over a year. They'd taken money out of it twice, which I already knew from Neville, and when my father's hours got cut at the place he'd moved to after the long gap, they went from covering the payment with a little strain to not covering it. He described this to me as a bad run. He used the phrase circumstances beyond anyone's control, which is a phrase he has been using since I was a child, usually about things that were entirely within his control. There was a period where they were trying to work something out with the lender. There was a period where they stopped answering. And then there was a date, and the date passed, and now there was a new date, about 5 weeks out, by which they had to be gone. 5 weeks. I want to describe to you what happened in my body while my father explained this, because I've thought about it a lot since. Nothing happened. I was standing in my kitchen with a dish towel over my shoulder, and Naomi was in the other room with the TV on, and I stood there and listened to Raymond describe the collapse of everything he'd ever bragged about. And I felt like a man watching a bus arrive exactly on schedule. He asked me to help. He didn't say it that way. My father cannot say a sentence like that. What he said was that he'd been thinking about how, when a family has resources, it's foolish for anyone in it to be paying rent to strangers. He said he understood I'd done well, he'd heard. And he wanted me to know he'd always thought I had a good head for that kind of thing. He said this like a compliment, like he was pinning a medal on me. And then he said that he and Diana were prepared to be flexible, that they didn't need much, that it would be temporary, and they'd contribute what they could once he got his hours back. And then he said the sentence. He said he knew I'd probably want to bring up old business, and he hoped I wasn't going to be difficult about this. 16 years since I left that house. 31 years old. 3 properties. And the first substantive conversation my father has had with me in 2 years, he reaches for the same word he reached for when I was 12 and asked why I was the one going up the ladder. I asked him to say it again, not angrily. I just asked him to repeat it. And he did, because he genuinely did not hear anything wrong with it, and that's the part that people don't believe. But I need you to understand that Raymond is not a man performing cruelty. He is a man who has built a functioning worldview in which his son is difficult, and every fact that arrives gets sorted into that worldview, and the worldview has never once been wrong, because it can't be. It's not a lie he tells. It's the operating system. I told him I had a property he could look at. I told him I'd need to think about terms. He said terms like it was a joke I'd made, and then when I didn't laugh, there was a silence. And he said, all right. He'd wait to hear from me. Now let me tell you what I'd already done, because this is the part where I stop being sympathetic to some of you, and I'm fine with that. I told you in the original post that, around Easter, Neville mentioned my mother had been asking whether I'd done well and saying family should be able to count on family. Neville is 34, he's Diana's sister's son, he sells parts at a supply counter, and he has never in his life understood that information has weight. He tells me things about my parents the way you'd read a weather report. He does not know he is doing anything. And after Easter, I started paying attention differently. Here is the thing about foreclosure that people don't realize until it touches them, which is that it is not private. The dates get published, the notices exist, anyone can look. I'm not going to pretend I stumbled onto it. I went and I looked the way I look at every property I've ever bought, because that is literally what I do. That is how I found my second building. And there they were, Raymond and Diana, the street I grew up on, the house with the plywood floor in the attic and the window that never closed. That was in May, 2 months before my mother called me and used the word temporary 4 times. So when she called, and when he called, I already knew. I knew about the second withdrawal. I knew roughly what they owed. I knew the sale date before Raymond told me there was a new date. I had known for weeks, and I let my mother tell me it was complicated, and I let my father tell me it was circumstances, and I said nothing. Because I have spent my entire adult life being told that I am the one who makes things difficult, and I have learned exactly how much power there is in letting people fill silence. And I want to be honest with you, there was a version of this where I bought the house, I ran the numbers, multiple times. I sat with a spreadsheet at my kitchen table and worked out whether I could take that house at the sale, and the answer was that it would be tight and stupid, and I'd be overpaying for a building with a bad roof in a neighborhood that has been slowly sinking for 15 years. It was a terrible investment. And I sat there wanting to do it anyway, wanting to own the walls, wanting my father to have to knock on a door that belonged to me. And I understood, sitting there, that I was one decision away from becoming a person who spends $100 and something thousand to win an argument with a 12-year-old. Naomi came in while I had the spreadsheet open. She's 29, she's practical in a way I find genuinely restful, and she has met my parents exactly once, at a cousin's thing 3 years ago, where Diana asked her within 4 minutes what her parents did and then didn't ask her another question all evening. She looked at the screen for a while, and then she asked me what I actually wanted, and I said I wanted them to understand. And she said understanding isn't a thing you can buy for somebody, and if I bought that house, I'd own a house and they'd still not understand. I didn't like that. We didn't fight exactly, but there was an edge to the rest of that evening. She thinks this is going to eat me. She said so twice now. She has never told me not to do it. That's not who she is. But she asked me, later that week, standing in the garage where the bucket is, whether there was anything they could say that would end it, any sentence, any apology, and I thought about it seriously, and I told her no, and she nodded and went inside. I don't know what that nod meant. I still don't. That's its own problem, and it's growing. So I didn't buy the house. What I did instead was better and cheaper, and I've been sitting on it since June. My third property, the one I bought at 30, is a 2-story on the north side that I've been rehabbing in stages. Downstairs is done. Upstairs is 2 bedrooms, both livable, one of them decent. And above that, there's a finished attic space with a dormer, a pull-down ladder, a plywood subfloor, and a roof that has needed work since before I bought it. There is a slow leak at the north-facing seam. I know exactly where it is because I found it in my first winter with the building, and I priced the repair, and I chose to do the kitchen instead. I have not fixed that roof, deliberately, since June. When I told Raymond I had a property he could look at, I was talking about that house, and I'd already decided how it was going to go. They get the house, all of them, my parents and Ophelia and both kids, and there is a lease, and the lease has terms, and I am not a son doing a favor. I am a landlord. Everything on paper, everything countersigned, rent, deposit, due dates, the whole architecture of it, at a number they can technically afford and will feel every month. And I would tell them, when they arrived, which room was which. That was the plan 3 weeks ago. That's the plan I called my father back with on the Wednesday. And it did not survive contact because I made one calculation error, and it wasn't about money. I forgot about Ophelia. She called me Thursday. My sister and I have not had a real conversation since I was 23 when she got married, and I went to the wedding and sat at a table with Neville and left before the dancing. She is 29 now, 2 kids, 6 and 3, divorced a year and a half, living in the master bedroom of a house that has a sale date. And Ophelia does not think she was a golden child. That is the thing I was not prepared for, and I'm still turning it over, because it doesn't fit anywhere in my head. She told me that our parents ruined her, that she was never allowed to fail, not once. That when I stopped showing up at 17, everything they had went into her, all of it, every expectation, and she was in that master bedroom listening to them talk about how at least one of their children was worth something, and she was 12, and she has never been able to breathe since. And her marriage fell apart because she cannot exist in a room without needing to be the reason it's happy. She told me she used to hear me on the ladder at night. She told me she never once asked why I was up there because she was afraid that if she asked, they'd move her. And then, in the same conversation, in the same breath practically, she told me that I was being cruel, that I had money and they had nothing, and that if I made our parents sign a lease, she would never speak to me again, and that whatever I thought I was owed, I should take it out on them and not on her children, who did nothing to me, who are 6 and 3, who don't have a bedroom now. She's right about the children. She's right about the children, and she used them, in the same sentence the way she has used everything her whole life. And I don't know how both of those can be true, but they are. I told her the offer stood as I made it. I told her nobody was obligated to take it. She hung up on me. And then Friday, my mother texted, and this is where it stops being about a lease. Diana wrote that Raymond hadn't been telling me everything about the house, that there was a reason it went the way it went, and that it wasn't the hours and it wasn't the withdrawals, not really, that she'd tell me in person and only in person, that I owed her that much. And she wrote one more line under it. She wrote that when I heard it, I'd understand why they put me up there. They're coming Saturday to see the house. Update 2. Half of you told me my mother's text was a manipulation. The other half told me I'd be a coward not to hear it. Somebody said she was going to tell me I wasn't Raymond's son, and I want to say right now, before anything else, that it wasn't that. It was never going to be that. My family isn't interesting enough for that. Saturday, 10 in the morning. They pulled up in Raymond's truck, the gray one he's had since I was in high school, and Ophelia came separately in a Corolla with a bumper that doesn't match the rest of the car. The kids stayed in her car with a tablet. I'd asked her to leave them home, and she'd said she had nobody to leave them with, which was probably true and also a decision. Naomi took one look out the window and told me she was going to the hardware store. She didn't want to be in that house. We'd had a conversation Thursday night that I've been chewing on since, where she asked me what happens after. And I said, after what? And she said, after they sign, after they're upstairs, after you've done it. What happens the next morning, and the morning after that, and in November? And I didn't have an answer. I told her they'd be tenants, that it wasn't complicated. And she said, not unkindly, that I'd been keeping a bucket on a garage shelf for 13 years, and she didn't think complicated was the problem. She's not wrong. I still didn't cancel Saturday. So it was the four of us in the front room of a house I own, which is a sentence I've been building toward for a very long time, and which felt like almost nothing when it actually happened. Raymond walked the ground floor and did the thing where he taps a wall with two knuckles. He commented on the kitchen. He said it was decent work and asked who did it, and I said I did, and he moved on to the next room without responding to that. And that right there is 31 years in one gesture. Diana didn't look at the house at all. She wanted to talk. She had the look of someone carrying something she'd rehearsed. I made them sit down first. I want you to know I did this on purpose. I had the lease printed and I had it face down on the table, and I did not touch it. And I let my mother tell me what she came to tell me. Here it is. The house didn't go under because of Raymond's hours. It went under because of the second withdrawal, and the second withdrawal wasn't for the roof and it wasn't for a bad year. It was for Ophelia. When her marriage ended, she came home with 2 kids and about $11,000 of debt attached to the marriage and legal costs on top, and Raymond and Diana went to the house and pulled money out of it to make her whole. Not a loan, not a discussion. They wrote it off before they wrote the check. And then Raymond's hours got cut 8 months later. And the payment that had been strained became the payment that couldn't be made, and the whole thing came apart because there was no cushion left. The cushion was in Ophelia's name. Diana told me this like it was the confession, like she was handing me a wound. And then she said the second part, and this is the part I actually came into that room for. She said she'd always known I could handle things, that from the time I was small, I was the one who didn't need anything, and Ophelia was the one who fell apart if you looked at her wrong. She said that's not favoritism. She said that's a mother reading her children. She said Ophelia needed the master bedroom, needed the second room, needed the money, needed all of it. Because Ophelia would have broken, and I wouldn't, and I didn't. Look at me. I'm sitting here in a house I own, and Ophelia is in a Corolla in my driveway with 2 kids and nowhere to go. And she said that's why they put me up there. Because they could. She said it like it was love. She sat in my front room and told me that my entire childhood, the ladder, the plywood, the ice in the bucket, the neighbor at the mailbox, 16 years of being the difficult one, was a compliment. That they took from me because I could bear it. That the word difficult wasn't cruelty, it was a shorthand. It was the sound they made when they meant this one doesn't need us. And Raymond, who had been quiet, said that was about right. He said I'd always been self-contained. He said he'd never once worried about me, and that some fathers would consider that the highest thing you could say about a son. I asked him if he'd ever gone up the ladder in February. He said this is what he meant, this right here. I want to tell you what I felt, and I can't exactly, because it wasn't rage. Rage I've had for 19 years. Rage is furniture. I know where it is in the dark. This was something else. Because for about 90 seconds sitting there, I understood them. Not agreed. Understood. I could see the whole machine of it. A woman who had a child at 19 and never got to want him. A man who resented the year everything got hard, and a second child who arrived on purpose and became the receptacle for everything they wished the first one had let them feel. They didn't hate me. Hating me would have required looking at me. They just decided, early, that I was fine, and then they spent 31 years arranging every fact to confirm it. And when I got up and left and built something out of nothing, that was the final proof. See? He was fine. My success is their alibi. That's the thing I've been carrying around all week and can't put down. Everything I built to hold over them, they've already absorbed into their story. The duplex, the buildings, all of it. It doesn't indict them. It exonerates them. Diana looked around my house and saw a verdict in her favor. So I turned the lease over, and I read it to them. Out loud. All of it. The rent, which is under market and which will still be the largest single obligation in their lives. The deposit, first month, last month, all of it due before keys. The clause about occupancy. The clause about my right of entry with notice. The clause that says if the rent is late by more than 5 days, there's a fee. And the fee is not negotiable, and I named the amount. Ophelia had come in by then. She was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, and she started to say something around the third paragraph, and I kept reading. I read for 11 minutes. Nobody stopped me. Raymond let me finish, which surprised me. Then he said one word. Terms. And then he told me, calmly, that he wasn't going to sign a thing like that. That family doesn't do that. That he'd raised a son who apparently learned how to squeeze people, and he supposed that's what the world teaches. But he wasn't going to sit in his own child's house and be treated like a tenant. And if this was what I was offering, then I could keep it. Here's what my father is. He is not stupid. He was calling it. He'd worked out, faster than I gave him credit for, that I needed them in that house more than they needed to be in it. That the whole thing only means something if they take it. And that the one lever he still had was refusal. He'd rather be homeless than accept it as a transaction, because the transaction is an admission. And if he ever admits it, then he was a man who made his son sleep under a leaking roof for 6 years for no reason at all. He would genuinely rather lose the house twice. Diana started crying. And I don't think it was strategy. I think she'd expected me to be moved by her explanation, and instead, I'd read her a document, and she asked me what I wanted from her, what would be enough. And I told her the truth, which is that there's nothing she can say, that we're a decade past the part where words do anything, and she said then, "Why are we here?" And I said, "Because you called me." And Ophelia lost it. She told the room that this was exactly what she'd said would happen. She told our parents that they'd ruined both of us, that they'd spent her whole life making her the reason I was in an attic, and never once asked if she wanted the job. She told them about the 11,000, that she never asked for it, that she found out after, that Diana handed her a check and told her not to tell Raymond how much it upset him. And she took it because she had a 3-year-old and no money, and she has been paying for it in a currency nobody warned her about ever since. And then she turned around and told me that I was worse than them, because they at least did it out of stupidity and I was doing it with a printed lease. Because I'd known about the sale date since May and let them come to me. Because I'd been keeping score since I was 12 and building a life out of the scoring, and my nephew is 6 years old and doesn't know why the grown-ups are shouting in a stranger's living room. That last part landed. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. Raymond stood up and said they were leaving. Diana said his name, he said it again, and Ophelia said she wasn't going anywhere. And there it was, the fracture, right in front of me, because Ophelia has 2 children and 24 days and no pride left to protect, and Raymond has nothing but pride. She asked me if the offer was for her, alone, her and the kids, without them. And Raymond told her that if she signed that lease, he was finished with her, that she'd be taking her brother's side against her own father, and Ophelia said something that I've been hearing in my head every night since, which is that she'd been on his side for 29 years and it cost her everything. And where was he going to go? Exactly. Where? They left. All 3 of them, in the end, because the kids were in her car and Diana was in his truck, and there wasn't a version of that afternoon where anybody drove off cleanly. Ophelia texted me from a gas station 40 minutes later. She said she'd sign it. She said she'd sign anything. She said she needed to know if the room she'd get would be the one at the top. Because she'd already worked out that there was one. And I sat there looking at that message, and I understood that if I say yes, I am handing my sister exactly what she asked for, which is punishment, which is absolution, and I am letting my parents walk away untouched with their whole story intact, homeless and vindicated. And if I say no, I have nothing. 24 days and an empty house and a bucket on a shelf. Raymond called Neville that night. Neville called me Sunday morning to tell me, because Neville cannot hold anything. And what Raymond had told him was that they had somewhere to stay, that it was handled, that Diana's sister had offered. Neville's mother, who has never offered anybody anything. I asked Neville if that was true. He got quiet. which Neville never does, and then he said his mother had told Raymond no on Thursday, before they ever came to my house. Which means my father sat in my front room, knowing he had nowhere, and refused anyway. He is going to make himself homeless to keep me wrong. And I have 23 days now, and a sister who wants the attic. And I finally understand that I never had the leverage I thought I had, because you cannot financially pressure a man who is willing to lose. So I've stopped trying to move him. I'm going to move the ground he's standing on instead. I made a call Monday, and there's one thing my father has never been able to survive, and it isn't money. I'll tell you Saturday. Final update. The call I made on Monday was to Ophelia. I know. Some of you were expecting something else. Somebody in the comments guessed I'd bought the house at the sale after all, and somebody else was convinced I had a plan involving the neighbors. No. It was my sister, and it was the only thing left. And it worked exactly the way I wanted it to, which is why I've been sitting on this post for 4 days instead of writing it. Let me back up. What I understood after that Saturday was that I'd been aiming at the wrong thing my whole adult life. I thought money was the pressure. I thought if I could stand over Raymond with a lease and a rent number, that was the ladder in reverse. But my father doesn't care about money. He never did. He cared about the story, that he was a man doing his best with a difficult son. And he had been willing to hand that story to every neighbor, every cousin, every person at every barbecue since I was 12. He'd sit in a shelter before he'd let it be edited. He proved that in my front room, sitting there knowing Diana's sister had already told him no. You cannot squeeze a man who is willing to lose everything except one thing. So you take that one thing. His story only works if Ophelia stays in it. She's the proof. She's the easy one, the one they raised right. The one who validates the whole arrangement. Every time Raymond has said Dwayne was difficult, the sentence has depended on there being a second child standing behind him nodding. And that second child had just asked me, from a gas station, whether the room at the top of my house was available. So I called her. Not to gloat, not to negotiate. I asked her one question, which is whether she understood what our father would be if she signed. She said yes. She said she'd understood it since she was 12. Then I did something I've been over about 40 times in my head and I still don't know how to describe without one of you telling me it's manipulation. And honestly, fine, call it that. I told her I'd tear up the lease. All of it. She and the kids get the house, the whole house, the 2 bedrooms, and the downstairs, no rent for a year. And after that, we'd talk like adults. I told her I'd pay to have the roof done before winter. I told her I would sign it in front of a notary so she'd never have to wonder if I'd change my mind. One condition. She tells them herself, in person, not a text. She sits in front of Raymond and Diana, and she says the words out loud, that she is taking her brother's house, that she is taking it because her brother is the only person in that family who ever did anything for her that didn't come with a bill attached, and that she will not be the reason they get to keep telling the story anymore. She asked me if I was doing this for her or to him. I told her the truth, which is that I don't know, that I stopped being able to separate those two things somewhere around age 14, and that if she wanted to walk away from the offer on principle, she should do it now, in the next 30 seconds, because I wasn't going to make it twice. She didn't walk away. I'll tell you what that cost me, though, because it wasn't free, and Naomi is the one who paid part of it. When I came in from the garage that night and told her what I'd done, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said the thing that has been sitting on my chest ever since, that I'd just given away a year of rent on a property I own and paid for a roof out of pocket. And if this were about money, I'd be the one who lost. So would I please? Please tell her that I understood what it was actually about. And I said I did. And she asked me to say it. And I couldn't. I stood in my own kitchen, and I could not make the sentence, and she went to bed. We're okay, I think. She was there on the last day, which I'll get to. But there's a version of this where I win everything, and she's not standing next to me at the end of it, and I saw that version clearly for about a week. They came on a Thursday, 12 days before the sale date. Ophelia went to the house on the street where I grew up, which was mostly boxes by then, my mother's sewing room stripped, the master bedroom that had been Ophelia's, then Ophelia's again, empty. And she sat in the kitchen with them and she said it. And she told me afterward that Diana kept trying to make it about me, kept saying that I'd bought her, that this was what I'd been building toward. Look how he twisted you. And Ophelia said the only thing she said all afternoon that mattered, which was, He offered me a room and you never once did. And Raymond didn't shout. That's the part I wasn't ready for. My father, who has never in his life declined an opportunity to be right, sat at his kitchen table and asked his daughter, quietly, if she was really going to do this to them. And she said yes. And he got up and went out to the truck and sat in it. Now here's where it got worse, and I want to be honest about this because a couple of you have said this story is too clean. Diana called me that night. Not Raymond. Diana. And she didn't rage, she bargained, and she was good at it. She has been good at it my entire life. She told me she'd say anything I wanted her to say. She asked me to write it down and she would read it. Whatever the words were. She said she'd stand in front of the whole family and say she was wrong about the attic. That she'd say it at a holiday, in front of everyone, in front of Neville's mother, if I would just let her and Raymond have one of the bedrooms. And I want you to understand how close I came. Because that was it. That was the sentence I've been waiting for since I was 14, and stood at that mailbox and heard the word prefers. She was offering me the confession, in public, on my terms. And I sat with the phone and I realized it was worthless. Because she wasn't offering to be sorry. She was offering to perform being sorry, as a payment, in exchange for housing, which is precisely the transaction my father had refused to make in my front room 3 weeks earlier, and which he would have hated her for making. She'd have said the words, she'd have meant them the way you mean a receipt, and then she'd have been upstairs in my house and every month I'd have looked at her and known the exact price of my own apology. $900 a month. Or whatever number I'd have set. There was never anything she could say. I told Naomi that in the garage in June and I was right. I said no. She asked me what kind of man I was. I said I was the kind she raised and I hung up. And that's the last time I have spoken to my mother. They moved out on a Tuesday. They went into a one-bedroom on the far side of town, month to month, above a place that sells tires. Neville told me, because Neville tells everyone everything, and he also told me, and this is the thing I keep taking out and looking at, that Raymond has been telling the family that they gave the house up because it was too much upkeep, and that they moved to be closer to things, and that they're doing fine, and that Ophelia has fallen in with her brother, who was always difficult. He is still saying it. He said it last week. He will say it at Christmas, and the year after that, and he will die saying it. And there is not one thing in this world I can do about that. And I have finally, at 31, accepted that the man's opinion of me was never available for purchase or repair. It was never a lock I could pick. It was a wall with nothing behind it. But here's what he says it to now. He says it to Neville, who knows. He says it to Diana's sister, who told him no. He says it in a one-bedroom over a tire shop. And when he says Ophelia went with her brother, the person hearing it does the math instantly, every time. And the math is that both of Raymond's children chose the attic kid. And that is a sentence he now has to walk around inside of every day for the rest of his life while he insists it isn't there. I didn't take his house. He lost his house. I took the only thing he had left, which was the ability to say the word difficult and have it mean anything. Ophelia and the kids moved in 3 weeks ago. The lease I printed is in a drawer, unsigned, and it's going to stay there. My nephew has the good bedroom. My niece has the small one. Ophelia and I are not close, I want to be clear about that. We are two people who survived the same house from opposite ends, and mostly what we have is a shared vocabulary. She still tells me I'm cruel. I still think she took $11,000 and never asked whose roof it came out of. We're going to be arguing about this when we're 60. But last Saturday she asked me why I hadn't put her upstairs, and I told her the attic wasn't ever for her. The roofers came the week before last. 2 guys, 1 day, $4,200, and they pulled the old flashing off the north seam and showed me the rot where the water had been getting in for years, and I stood in the yard and looked up at it and paid them the same afternoon. Then I went home and I got the orange bucket off the garage shelf and I took it out to the curb with the rest of the trash, and I've been fine. I've been completely fine, except I went back out about an hour later and brought it inside again, and I don't know why. And it's on the shelf and I can't explain it to Naomi and I can't explain it to you. I got everything I wanted. They lost the house, and they came to me and I showed them the room. And I want to tell you it was worth 18 years. I'm still standing in the garage.